debt. Let me read to you some of the issues from this. Now, this is the actual draft agreement that I'm looking at here. They say, in terms of setting out their goals for this agreement, they want to recognize the intrinsic relationship between climate change, poverty eradication, and sustainable development. In other words, this is a war on poverty effort, always being used to sell a redistribution of wealth. They say they want to emphasize the need for universal sustained action by all to respond to the urgent threat of climate based on the best available scientific knowledge. And of course, they reference the UN IPCC, which has been putting out a lot of non-scientific conclusions based on this information. But let me read to you the actual article where they talk about establishing a world court. When they talk about facilitating implementation and compliance. In other words, how are they going to enforce these things that they agree to in this upcoming climate change? Well, they say they have two options. The second option is, and one of them is kind of a little bit voluntary, but the second option is the one that you need to be concerned about. They say an international tribunal of climate justice as a compliance mechanism hereby established to address cases of non-compliance of the commitments of developed countries in terms of finance, technology, development, and transfer, and the development of an indicative list of consequences taking into account the cause, type, degree, and frequency of non-compliance. In other words, what they're going to do is create a massive bureaucracy, kind of like what we've seen here in the United States with the EPA or the BLM, with the same kind of abuses, but it will be from a global governance standpoint. Now, listen to what they talk about further on when they talk about how this is going to be enacted. They say the composition of the compliance mechanism will be based on geographical representation. It'll have representation of the least developed countries and small island developing states. It will comprise 12 members. Understand, this is going to be a board with 12 members that will rule the world, and that's what they will do. And they will enact their decisions based on a 2/3 majority. They go on to say an enforcement branch will be there for developed countries and a facilitative branch for developing countries. Do you understand the difference? The developed countries are going to get the iron fist. They're going to get enforcement. The developing smaller countries are going to get help. They're going to get facilitation to help them along with this. And that means subsidies. They're going to transfer your wealth. We talked about this as being a redistribution of wealth that's from the richer countries to the poorer countries. That is what this is all about. They say the role of the enforcement branch will be to review compliance and commitments made by the developing countries. The enforcement branch may recommend actions that a developed country party should take. So you're going to get the cops on the developed countries, but the other guys are going to get the soft hand, the subsidy. The role of the facilitative branch will be to assist them in finding ways to incentivize their efforts to meet these commitments. In other words, what we're going to have is an American government that borrows even more money from the banks and then turns it over to these small groups or to the World Bank and then borrows it back again a second time. But we will get the iron fist. And we can see some of these actions coming, and remember there were 3 different things that were coming this year, and of course the one that was just enacted back in September as the Pope was concluding his visit to the United Nations was the resolution adopted by the General Assembly for transforming our world, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And this has a great deal in it. It has already been enacted. They say this agenda is a plan of action for people, planet, and prosperity. It will eradicate poverty in all of its forms. It is the greatest global challenge and an indispensable requirement for sustainable development. And this is for all countries and all stakeholders. And I stop there and I say, wait a minute. All countries, that should be inclusive enough. Why do we have all countries and all stakeholders? Well, folks, because it's the stakeholders, the ones who really own everything, that are going to be making these decisions. It's not going to be global democracy. It is going to be global corporatism. Multinational corporations and the billionaires who control them will be the ones who are calling the shots. They are the stakeholders. You don't have a stake in this future if we don't stop this. They are the stakeholders. And they say the United Nations headquarters in New York on September 25th to the 27th enacted this. They say this is an agenda, and this is their own summary of this. This is an agenda of unprecedented scope and significance. It is accepted by all countries and is applicable to all. taking into account different national realities, capacities, levels of development, etc. These are universal goals and targets which involve the entire world, developed and developing countries alike. They're integrated, indivisible, and they balance the three dimensions of sustainable development. This is a global plan. They see that this is really big. It's not getting any coverage in the press. People are not paying any attention to it. And yet we see that the Catholic Church is really the one that is taking the lead under this Pope. We have global bishops who've called for complete decarbonization by 2050. That's not something that's new. That was something that came out of the Copenhagen Exchange 6 years ago. What they have done is they are using the Catholic Church and this Pope as the new face to sell this old world agenda. This is what this is. We're going back into the Dark Ages, back into serfdom. And they point out these bishops are calling for complete decarbonization, no carbon of anything, okay? And they want a drastic reduction in the emission of carbon dioxide and other toxic gases. Folks, carbon dioxide is not a toxic gas. It's breathed out by us. But of course, they can reduce the number of people radically and reduce the amount of carbon. They can reduce our food and reduce the amount of carbon. They can keep us from heating and cooling our homes and kill us off that way, reduce our standard of living, reduce our life expectancy. They can get rid of us that way. They can decarbonize us with that. So the bishops have urged to keep in mind not only the technical, but particularly the ethical and moral dimensions of climate change, because that's the way they're coming at us this year. They say, of course, the disagreements are who should pay